Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to FOBtv, the future of business. It is here where we explore the forces shaping tomorrow. Now, I'm your host, Kevin Benedict. I'm a futurist and lecturer at TCS, and I want to thank all of you guys for joining us in the show today. I'm really excited about this because we have a distinguished guest, Tim Bird, who's joining us today, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him right now. So, Tim, he's a photographer. He's lived in Finland for 40 years. He's a writer, and he's the author of a brand new book called Happy Land, which I have purchased and read and loved it. So Happy Land, it's important. So thank you, Tim, for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's good to be here. Yeah. Happy Land, Finding My Inner Finn. I have to give a plug to the publisher. So it's iBooks, that is EYE, not I as in iPhone.
Okay.
And a UK publisher, independent publisher, but a very good one. So, yeah.
Well, I can assure you that I have been to every bookstore that I pass in Helsinki, and I've been here about a week, and I have seen in almost every bookstore right up front your book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so
I haven't been able to go out and have a look myself recently. So, yeah, thanks for that. Yeah.
That's lovely. As a matter of fact, I took a picture of it just to prove that in a couple of the spots yesterday. Anyway.
Okay. Oh, send them to me later. Yeah.
I'll do it. So on March 19th, Finland did it again, Tim. They were ranked the world's #1 happiest country for the 9th straight year. We're going to try to get into that and find out what their secret is. But before we do that, where are you calling in from today, Tim?
Well, I'm in my Helsinki suburban home. So it's an area called Tapanivainio. It's right on the northern edge of Helsinki on the way out to the airport. So, yeah, I mean, I live here. This is where I've lived for more than 40 years. So, yeah.
I love that. And you're a big bicyclist. And
yeah, I try to be. I'm itching to get out on my bike again.
It's been gorgeous weather. I still have to bundle up with gloves and a hat and a thick, but it's beautiful and sunny. So that's lovely. Yeah. So let's talk about this ranking. 9 straight years Finland has been ranked. Now, How do Finns feel about that ranking?
Yeah, well, kind of mixed reception. Of course, getting a bit blasé about it now, 9 years in a row. But there are some who are very cynical about it. You think, no, come on, don't be silly, that we're not really that happy. Obviously, the more official response is to make the most of it. So the Finnish Tourist Board, Visit Finland, of course, is, they're loving this, of course. And I think there's probably the majority opinion is that there's some kind of argument to be made that there is some truth in this, but the real thing is how you define happiness. So I think if happiness is defined as, in certain ways, as a kind of level of expectation from life, that doesn't mean that Finns aren't ambitious or use their initiative and so on. But there's a contentment for various reasons, which we'll probably cover in this conversation. But rather than everybody running around laughing, telling jokes, that's not what it's all about. It's more a kind of satisfaction with life.
Let's dig into that. And the reason why I think you bring an elite amount of expertise in this area, you've lived there 40 years. Now, you weren't born in Finland. You come from the UK, right?
That's right. Yeah. I'm English by birth. I come from southeast England. Some of your listeners probably are familiar with the geography of England to know where Dover is. Mm-hmm. So that's where I kind of grew up. And then I went to university in London, and when I came to Finland, I was living in Bristol, and the idea of coming to Finland was to kind of make my life more interesting, to do something interesting. And I came here as an English teacher. I didn't know anybody here. I didn't know anything about it, really. So it was all new, which was good because that's kind of what I wanted at the time, something new and unknown. And it was certainly that. And then I started getting the opportunities to do the kind of interesting work I wanted to do, which is what I've been doing ever since. I didn't stay an English teacher. I found other opportunities to write. And then the photography was a hobby, but that became more, well, it still is a hobby, but I can accompany my travel articles. I'm mainly a travel writer, although I've done all sorts of things, corporate journalism and websites, all sorts of things, guidebooks over the years. So I found lots of opportunities to do interesting stuff. And I thought it was about time to, when I wrote this book, the idea was to kind of, as you referred to earlier, there's not that much literature available. There's a lot of kind of lifestyle stuff. It's good books. Some of them by friends of mine and they are very good books, but they're a kind of different kind of book about Finland. And I wanted a more kind of balanced, personal, a kind of memoir, and to kind of look at this happiness issue, as I say, from a sideways perspective, not taking it for granted, but not being cynical about it either.
I love it. So, Tim, tell me, coming from outside Finland, do you think that gives you a different perspective, one that perhaps is even more clear than the Finns themselves? Or
well, I don't know about more clear than the Finns themselves, but of course it gives me a different perspective, yes. And I have been what you might call a professional foreigner. I've been a lot of the time employed to write about Finland, kind of stepping back from it. And at the same time, I've been very kind to Finland generally. I don't want to put it down. It's been good to me, given me lots of opportunities. But that's not to say it's perfect. But yeah, of course, it gives you a different perspective if you come from a different culture and a different background. But that has been to my advantage as well, because that's why I've been employed to write about it for international publications and so on. So yeah, I mean, like I say, to say that I know them better than themselves would be a bit patronizing. But yeah, of course, it gives you a different perspective.
So if we look at the top 10 rankings over the last decade in this ranking of happiest country, it's always dominated by Nordic companies or countries.
Yeah.
What do you think the collective secret is for Nordic countries to get that kind of high ranking?
Well, again, it goes back to the definition of happiness. So, and there's an argument that happiness is probably the wrong word for this report. It should probably be contentment or life satisfaction or something like that. But happiness is how they describe it. So, yeah, I mean, they do have things in common. They have a kind of a tradition they're more kind of egalitarian societies. Okay, Finland is the one without a royal family. The other Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, have royal families. But so, yeah, the countries do have something in common, and it's the kind of a sense of society, if you like. Again, it's generalizing to say this, but they are. I mean, you have to generalize if you're describing countries and what they have in common. So, and also a kind of tradition of having a kind of social safety net. That has been more of a challenge in recent years. So, for example, in Finland, there's a very good health service. They were set back by the pandemic. They're kind of catching up from then. And anyway, the kind of pressures of cost and so how these things are funded is as strong here as anywhere else. So I've benefited from the health service on several occasions, and now we pay a fee for example, for the surgery that I had recently, but it's affordable. I'm just giving this as an example of something that's kind of representative of all the Nordic countries. You're going to ask me anyway, I think, about lessons that can be learnt, or, how the Nordic countries could be followed as an example, and certainly the United States could follow with its resources and its wealth. It seems a bit ridiculous for us living here that a country like that, with all its resources and wealth, doesn't have a really affordable, okay, you have to pay something, but not, affordable sums for good healthcare universally, So this kind of thing. Taxation, there's an acceptance across all these countries and that the taxation is traditionally quite high in all these countries. Finland is doesn't top the charts in the taxation at the moment. I think it's probably Denmark, but there's a recognition that if you pay your taxes, you're going to get something in return. So there's a kind of acceptance of that. Okay, not, people don't like, and people will moan about paying taxes, but there is a kind of acceptance. These are examples. I mean, there are other examples. So there's a kind of sense of society, I think, in these countries that still, these characteristics, they've probably been eroded a little bit to some extent, but they're still sustained.
Well, enough for the rankings to still be dominated by the Nordics, isn't it?
Yeah. And this is why, the happiness it could be argued is the wrong word. It's more a matter of kind of life satisfaction, and you're going to be looked after to some extent. Again, there are people who, I wouldn't want to say that everybody is well off and everybody is in good health and everybody has a job. It's certainly not the case in any of these countries. They're not paradise, but they do have an advantage in these respects.
What I really respect is it seems like they do things purposeful, and then they make adjustments and corrections, but I love their aspirations. Those aspirations to me are something that can be emulated and modeled in other places. The aspiration and the perception of human dignity and what that means. It's that kind of thing that really appeals to me.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not sure if they can be replicated everywhere. Well, I mean, in theory, they can. There's nothing kind of secret about what gives them this advantage. I suppose, I mean, if you were in other countries, in other parts of the world with different cultures and different histories, they'd be less inclined to follow these examples. But yeah, we could talk for quite a long time about this. So.
Oh yeah. So let me ask you this. You've been there for over 40 years. You've seen how Finland has evolved during that time. And, during that time, all kinds of technologies have started shaping and steering the direction of society. How do you think, what's your impression about how emerging technologies will enhance or diminish this contentment, if you would, in Finland over the next 10 years, say?
Yeah, well, this is probably part of the picture that all these countries, including Finland, let's talk about Finland, and we don't want to talk about the others. They can look after themselves.
Yeah.
But Finland is quite advanced in terms of digitalization, so services, and also, ID. Like I know that in the UK, people are very suspicious about the idea of having ID cards and so on. But in Finland, that kind of thing is accepted and not considered to be a great threat to your personal life and so on. And it's an advantage, the digitalization. I mean, that was quite advanced. And of course, the fact that this was the birthplace of Nokia.
All of us have had Nokia phones at some point.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I mean, this was one of the big kind of landmarks in recent Finnish history because it was such a huge international company for such a small country. It was one of the kind of turning points that kind of steered Finland more to the West as well, because it was so internationalized at that time. It made it more cosmopolitan, more foreigners were coming here to work, and quite a lot of them stayed. So it had an influence also on this pull to the West that Finland has experienced over the last decade. The other examples of that would be joining the European Union in 1995, I think, and then more recently joining NATO, which was a big deal. I mean, that was a massive kind of step to take for Finland.
So let me ask you, is there a downside to this social media and mobility that Finland has recognized? And what have they done about it?
Oh, well, the availability of information, the digitalization of services, including public transport and health service and taxation and everything, that reached a higher level earlier than in most countries.
Wow.
But the disadvantages, I mean, there have been some very high profile cases of Finnish hackers and scammers. So they would be obvious disadvantages, but they're the same everywhere, I think. So, yeah, I mean, we're not cut off from the rest of the world. So the bad things that happen in other countries happen here too. We're not saints here.
So one of the things that is just so interesting to me is that I read over and over again about Finland investing heavily in foresight, kind of looking at the future planning. They have these institutions like Sitra and the Finnish Parliament Committee for the Future. And having that purposeful, future-oriented view is rare, Tim. You don't find that everywhere.
No.
And so I look at that and go, is there something unique about the Finnish culture that invites this forward-thinking view?
I don't know if it's unique, but there is a tendency to plan. Finns are quite kind of well organized. Again, I'm generalizing. I don't know if this is peculiar to Finland, but the tendency to kind of plan and yeah, I mean, there's this dreaded word in Finnish for me anyway, which is called ohjelma. So any kind of occasion, it means like program. So everything has to have a program. I'm not like that. I'm a little bit more spontaneous, but I've learned to live with it. And it's not a bad thing, but it like, if you're in the corporate world or in the social world too, there's always an ohjelma.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there is this kind of, I suppose, a national tendency to plan ahead. But again, I wouldn't be able to say if that's unique to Finland. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it's quite a conservative country. There's kind of paradoxes because you won't find it's conservative necessarily in every way. But in terms of planning and kind of being law-abiding also, there's a level of conservatism. This is one of the things you have to live with in Helsinki is it's continuously and you've probably seen this while you've been here. They're always digging something up somewhere. And like if they've dug it up at one end of the road, when they finished at the other end, then they start again at the first end. And it goes on like this forever. It sometimes seems anyway.
I know. And then in your book, you reference the point that you should have invested in those construction fencing and cones.
That's right.
I love that.
The fences, these plastic fences that go up wherever there's a construction site, and there's a lot of construction sites.
Oh, yeah.
And Helsinki is developing it has been developing like crazy. It's probably been a little bit ahead of itself, because now I think they're having problems actually selling all the new properties that are being built in apartment blocks in new suburbs and so on.
Well, when I first started visiting Finland, and I've been here, I think three times so far. One of the things that struck me is, I wonder if what they've learned in Finland that works and that helps the country rank itself very highly for happiness or contentment. Is that something that can be exported? Can they create consulting companies that teach the rest of the world how to do what the Nordics have done?
Well, I believe the Visit Finland has this little promotional campaign to invite people to Finland to teach them how to be happy or something like that, which is it's a nice idea for promoting the country. But I don't know if they take these lessons back to their countries and, put them into practice there. I don't know, really. I think there needs to be a kind of cultural traditions of, like I say, the kind of more societal. It's also down to the fact that Finland we talk about Finland specifically, has, quite a small population for a big country. So it means that you kind of run into people who know somebody quite often.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in the same kind of field of work, but not necessarily then. I mean, I've quite often met people in London, for example, who I've met, just out of the blue. I happen to have known them in Finland. This has happened, just pure coincidence.
So I'm staying here in Helsinki in an Airbnb, and my colleague here in Helsinki said, "Hey, so where are you located? Where's your Airbnb located?" And I identified the address, and they said, I lived in that same building, my apartment. And I'm like, what?
Okay.
What are the odds?
Yeah, in Finland, quite high, or low. Yeah.
So this just seems like a good place to bring in the topic that the Finns are well known for, which is sauna in the US, but sauna culture and its impact on this happiness and contentment. What's your interpretation and understanding of that?
Yeah, well, it is a very strong and kind of continuing feature of Finnish culture. There's no doubt, that it really is the case. And it's become more popular it's not something that the kids would, young people would kind of turn their noses up at or think it's not cool or whatever. It is actually, from a young person's point of view. So I'm led to understand, not being, it's a sustained part of Finnish culture through all age groups. And I think part of the appeal, part of the idea is, apart from the kind of pleasure of actually, having a sauna and going for a dip in the lake, and the whole experience is quite, once you kind of get over the fear of it, especially as an Englishman, the idea of, taking all your clothes off and going in a hot chamber with lots of other people with no clothes on, it's not very English, So, but once you get over that, there's the kind of equality of it, the kind of leveling experience. So, everybody is the same.
Yeah.
If you go in the sauna, it doesn't matter if you're a president or a CEO or a street cleaner or whatever. When you're in there and you're talking, you do know the people you go and have sauna with, but there is that kind of leveling aspect to it. And that again is that's quite a Finnish thing, I suppose. Traditionally, again, the gaps are opening up a bit between the people who have substantial wealth and those who don't necessarily, has widened in recent decades, but still the gap is probably narrower than it would be in many other Western countries. So it's part of that aspect of Finnish culture and Nordic culture too, I think. Yeah.
So Tim, I want to talk about photography.
Okay.
So
how long have you got?
So after, taking pictures and photographing Finland for so many years, do you believe a landscape shapes the psychology of a people? And how has it shaped Finland, if you believe that?
So many people might associate Scandinavian countries with mountains, but Finland doesn't actually really have that many mountains. Right up in the north in Lapland, Finland is a very long country, so it's like 1,300 kilometers from tip to tip, I think, going from south to north. And the climate also changes. I mean, we're far north, so you're always gonna get some spells of cold weather. But up in the north, it can be really cold for sustained periods. So the climate itself has an effect on it would do on any national character. And it does in Finland. So if they are a little bit withdrawn traditionally, again, that is less the case these days because they're more urbanized, and a lot of people have come to the south of Finland from these more remote rural areas. But the landscape itself is forest and lakes, and an awful lot of forest and an awful lot of lakes. But there are subtle variations, which you need to spend time here to kind of appreciate. It's not just forest and lakes, without any variation. Right up in the north, there are fells, upland fells, which I think the highest point in Finland's border is something like 1,100 meters. So that's not particularly high when in Norway is next door, where the mountains are much higher than that.
Right.
So it's a relatively flat country then, relatively. So there's broad, wide spaces. I think that probably has an influence on the traditional Finnish national character. As I say, and I've argued, I also mentioned this in the book, that I think there's a kind of transition taking place. Younger Finns are more urbanized, more international, speak lots of languages, and more outgoing. So the kind of idea, which is the stereotype of Finns being completely silent, monosyllabic, a little bit gloomy, I think that stereotype is going to be less and less valid as the decades go by from now on. Already is in Helsinki. I think in Helsinki, it's a proper city now, more so than when I first came to Finland. It has all the attractions and the advantages of a modern city. A lot of Finnish culture, traditional Finnish culture, dates back to this rural communities, smaller rural communities. The idea that you don't respond immediately is not necessarily a bad one, that you consider your answer rather than just kind of fill the space for the sake of it. So Finns wouldn't credit themselves with being very good at small talk, and I suppose they're not really, but that doesn't really matter. If what they say makes sense and is of some substance, then maybe that's more important. I don't know. I come from a culture where small talk is quite important, and I'm still inclined to fill those silences with small talk. That hasn't, I'm still English at heart. So
understood.
I'm a dual citizen. I'm a Finn as well now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Love it. So when you began your career, Tim, travel writers interpreted places for readers who had never seen them. But today, everyone carries a camera and can instantly share images online everywhere. They can take, you can go out and take 1,000 pictures. It doesn't cost anything, right? So has that changed the purpose in your approach to travel storytelling?
Well, it's had an effect, certainly. And I didn't really talk about the photography when we were talking about the landscapes, but I do very much enjoy photographing Finnish landscapes. That's more for pleasure than work, although I've had occasion to do both. Yeah, the kind of instant availability of images has meant from a work photography point of view, it's made it more challenging, of course, because publications will usually opt for the cheap, or quite often they'll go for economy rather than quality. So if it's a picture that illustrates something, they won't necessarily consider the quality of the picture in terms of its composition or the amount of thought that's gone into it. They're more interested in the subject. So that means people like myself have to rise to the top a little bit more. And like you say, everybody's a photographer now, considers themselves to be a photographer. And it is very instant. I use digital equipment and everything, of course, but I like to think of taking pictures that are going to be kind of valid, in 20 years' time, rather than ones that are only going to be looked at quickly on Instagram and liked, or so-called liked. And then, they move on to the next picture within 2 seconds or whatever.
Let's talk about that composition that you just mentioned about what still makes a photograph or a travel story really meaningful. It's not just the Instagram or the TikTok. What really makes that picture and makes that story work?
Well, that, of course, depends on what the editors are looking for, and what kind of magazine or publication or book it is. But in my case, I've been trying to do more recently. As I say, taking the foot off the pedal gives me a little bit more time to think about what I want to do and which projects to get involved. So at my own initiative. So I've been doing very interesting stuff from Estonia, which is our neighboring country across the Baltic. And I won an award for a story I did about an old textile factory right on the border with Russia. It was very much appreciated by the local community. I've done several other projects like that. For me, makes it more worthwhile doing. And of course, I'm not doing it for free, but it means I can spend a bit of time. And so from my point of view, and there are still some very good outlets for that, some long read online magazines. There's one called Hidden Compass that I've done a couple of stories for, which were very well received. I'm looking for more material, to do more material like that, in-depth stuff that involves the local community, that the local community will appreciate as well. It's more challenging to find projects like that, but it's also more rewarding.
So Tim, thank you so much for the time, for being on the show today. I mean, all of us who read these headlines about Finland, the first thing we want to do is go, I need to learn more. So your book, Happy Land, and
Finding My Inner Finn.
I love it. Happy Land by Timothy Bird. Tim, thank you so much for being a part of the show today, sharing your insight from 40 years of living in Finland. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.